I'm John DeArmond.
And I'm Edward.
And we're with Coquille Valley Sword Group. And today we're going to do the introduction to the Neto Seho. And the Neto Seho is the most famous of the kata sets that we do, and it is the two-sword work. Ni, to, sword, two-sword. Seho is a method, technique, kind of. So we'll start off by showing the 5 kamae that are used most commonly in these 5 kata, and then we will go on to show the opening of the kata and the end of it, the kamae otoku section. We are not going to go over the saho, both because we don't use it and because it tends to change based on the group that you're working with, and it's not really germane to the actual sword work. If you're interested in the saho, go on YouTube, look at the different embu, choose one that you think is fancy for you, right, and that'll be good. So actually we'll start with like a brief discussion about the Neto Seho and how it relates to our style right up next. The Neto Seho, our two-sword technical work, is it's the meat and potatoes of how we fight in Hyoho. Now, to be clear, Hyoho is not even remotely the only koryu that has two-sword work. Musashi was not the person who invented two-sword work. Using two swords at once does not automatically mean that you have an advantage over somebody using one sword. There are a lot of myths that spring up around the use of 2 weapons at once and Musashi. So when they come together, it's quite a hodgepodge of misinformation, both in terms of praise and derision. So I'm going to suggest that you guys just kind of take all those preconceived notions and just set them in a little box, right? Don't touch them until you've done the work a little bit and you get some kind of foundation in reality as to what this work is, what it's for. And then you can go back through that box and sort of sift through it. Now, the two-sword work represents how we actually fight. Whereas the Tachi Seho was literally learning your ABCs, the Nito Seho is how to compose sentences and paragraphs to put the pieces together in a way to which they that leaves them being meaningful, right? As such, the kata often look quite different from the Tachi Seho. But don't worry. Everything you learned in the Tachi Seho comes into play. It just doesn't necessarily look like how it looked then. From there, in the Kodachi Seho, we really start to look at more subtle interactions with body mechanics. Obviously, because it's a lot more grappling, being as a short sword work. But we'll save that for when we get to it. In the Nito Seho, there are 5 kata. Now, in Hyoho, there are 2 sets of other two-sword kata that are sometimes taught. Both of these were created after Musashi's time. I haven't decided whether or not we're going to go over them because they really aren't super useful. They don't add anything new. They're mostly just one set of katas is basically like suburi for your two-sword work, and the other one is like just, oh, I've got these extra cool ideas that you can do 2 swords with, which sort of misses the point of the two-sword work, which is why most instructors don't do them. They're the Aikuchi and the Sessa or Sesetsudan katas. But we'll decide on what we're doing with those later. Now, it should be understood that with the Neto Seho, we are training with two swords, not just so that we're able to use two swords, right? There's this idea, this myth, that Musashi only fought with two swords and that two swords was the best way to fight and that's what he did and that's why he won. Right? This is patently untrue, right? We have many, many, many examples of him fighting with one weapon and prevailing. Conversely, some people say, oh, the two swords is just this massive illusion, right? It's so that it's really the using one sword at a time that's important. And Musashi never used two swords in a duel ever, right? Again, this is patently untrue. We have plenty of examples of him using two swords to fight people and to prevail. So, what's the truth? Like always, it's somewhere in between, right? We study the two-sword work not only to be able to use that offhand or to use it in conjunction with the long sword, but also to be able to use the long sword more intelligently when we fight. Because the katana has a long handle, people have naturally gravitated to the idea of using it with two hands, right? They think, oh, one hand, I just feel so weak and powerless. I'm gonna get two hands on there. And really, I can control, I can hit hard with my big man muscles. Of course, even when their work becomes more sophisticated and they're like, oh, I'm not really using my muscles to hit the other dude in the way that I thought, right? They still cling to that, like, but I got two hands, it makes me feel comfortable, right? Musashi just tosses this out and he says, hey, you know, these swords were always meant to be wielded one-handed, right? They're cavalry sabers from the time when they were first developed till now. Like, just because we're on foot the majority of the time doesn't mean they're suddenly like, oh, it's a new weapon, I must use it differently, right? Understanding how to use a sword in many ways, or any tool in many ways, is useful, right? But just because you can use a hammer to measure like wear on your studs to put your electric outlets doesn't mean that that is the best tool for its job, or that is the only tool that the hammer can do, right? You got to remember, hammer's a hammer, and a katana is a one-handed sword. So, with the Neto Seho, we're getting this back in our body. We're getting these one-handed sword motions back into how we fight, how we work. And that's really the kind of meat and potatoes of it. So next, we're going to go through and we're going to show the combine. So we had a little bit of technical difficulty and the audio cut out when we filmed this section. So I'm going to go ahead and go over it for you so you can hear it. So the five kamae that we do, the five main kamae that we do in the Neto Seho are Chudan, Jodan, Geidan, Hidari Wakikamae, and Nigi Wakikamae. So we're going to go ahead and go through these and how you are supposed to move in and out of them real quick. So the primary stance is, of course, Chudan. Now, in this, while we refer to it as the Chudan position because it is the central position, the name of the kamae is actually Inso no kamae. Inso is a kind of circle. If you're familiar with the brush and ink paintings common to Zen, the single stroke circle, that's an example of Inso. There's a lot of meaning behind it, but we're going to set that aside for right now. Now, as we go through the Neto Seho, we're just going to call this chewed on because that's what everybody in my group did, right? So, the foot position for chewed on is very similar to sort of the standard chewed on position. The only difference is, rather than having our feet sort of shoulder width apart, we bring them in slightly more narrow, so we're at the width of our hips, right? You'll notice that with the Neto Seho, stances are higher, feet are closer together, and again, this is more in line with how we tend to actually apply the work. So, the spine is kept in the same position. Tail is tucked, shoulders relax slightly forward, head lifts as though being pulled up from the crown of your head like a puppet. Now, because we're going to have a lot of weight usually out in front of us, the tendency is for people to form their posture sort of like this, and they lean back to counterbalance. It's like when you're teaching somebody to shoot rifle for the first time, right? And they're holding it back. Just like with firearms, we want to be able to be braced against that incoming force. So a good drill is to stand with your feet in the proper position, tail tucked back straight, and just try and really stand as straight as you can. Doing this, you'll feel the weight kind of in the center of your feet or at the very front of the heel. Now what we want to do is, without moving the hips, lean the shoulders slightly forward and feel that weight rock forward onto the foot until it's right where it should be, right behind the ball of the foot. Right? This gives us just enough structure to be able to not be pushed over when we receive work from somebody else or even when we give work. So, into that hunter position, little shoulders, a little bit forward, right? To move into the position with the arms, if we're starting from gate on, we bring them out to the side. When the tips reach about throat level, we begin to bring them in, as so, right? The tips line up with each other, and they line up with your throat. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of angle here. You want to avoid being quite flat. It's also not as good to be fairly low. You know, anywhere from this 45-degree down is still workable, but you're going to have a rough time with sort of psychological control of the space. Bring it up, bring it in. The shape is, as its namesake indicates, a big circle, right? From the side, it's the same. Right? Now your grip in both hands should be the same. Tenouchi should be identical to what it was all through the Tachi Seho, right? Tight, touching, loose, right? Pretty simple, pretty easy. So again, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. Now, from Chudan, we go into the Jodan position, which again, we've got a different name for the Kamae. It's He no Kamae, He as in fire. So this is the attitude of fire. To move into the position, take a slight step forward with the right foot. Left foot pulls up as you thrust the tips of your sword forward. So that circle collapses as you push it in. This should have the same feeling as going into Hasso, where you scoop under their chin, right? So, little step, scoop. The daito, the long sword in your main hand, comes back to your ear in that same Hasso transition. The short sword straightens out, right? And settles. Straightens and settles. straightens, and settles. Together. Good. Right? Pretty simple, pretty easy. To go back into Chudan, if our spirit lessens, right? Go no show reference, right? You do the reverse. It comes back, and you draw out, right? As so. As so. To move into Gedan, feet are in the same position. We lower the hands, and we start to cut with the edge. Once we get about hip level, swords relax. Now with this, when viewed from the front, the tips should be at the same height, and it should be right in front of your knee. But, of course, because the shoto is shorter, it requires a steeper angle to be able to pull off this optical illusion, right? So, from this side, hands relax down, edges cut, get to hip level, and release. And release. Right. Back to Chudan. We're going to go into Hidari Wakigamai. To accomplish this, we're going to step forward strongly with the right foot. We push the swords forward just as in moving into Jodan, right? The shoto is going to operate in the same way and sort of relax into that more vertical, actually it's still angled, it's closer to a low sasen type angle, right? As the short sword relaxes back and the left foot moves in line with the right foot. So we push and settle. We push and settle, right? Nice and relaxed. The long sword is horizontal to the floor. This is one of the places that people tend to argue about. Which way is the edge going? You know, don't worry about it. Hold it somewhere comfortable. For me, I hold it like I'm intending to kind of kiriage. So it's got almost 45-ish degree angle, right? Migi, wakigamai, is the same thing but opposite. We're going to take a little step with front foot, push with the left foot, settle back with the right foot. The shoto is doing the same thing that it did going into Jodan and Migi Wakigamai, or Hidari Wakigamai, sorry, and it settles into that forward, relaxed position. So again, 1, 2, settle. The daito, longsword, is again horizontal with the floor. The nook of our wrists rests in the nook of the hip, and we're really kind of threatening koshi, the hips of the opponent at this point. All right? So we'll show from this side as so. Right? So those are the 5 basic kamae that we use in the Neto Seho. When you're working with the kamae, try to keep in mind that they exist for a reason, right? In other words, it's not as though somebody was just like, oh, you know, it'd be a really cool thing if we had one sword up high or down low, poking at their jimmy bits, right? They're not as affected as that. So, you know, go back, read, right? When you're just normal, when you're just chilling, when you're sussing the area out, or you're just trying to take a normal command of the situation, Chudan is a great happy middle ground. When you're feeling calm, feeling relaxed, you're feeling like, I got this, right? Your spirit lessens, you go into Gedan, right? You got a lot of power here if you're calm. Not so much if you're fidgety, right? Let's say you are feeling fidgety. Let's say you're feeling like just, gotta get the work done, gotta go do it, right? You got a lot of raised spirit. Then that attitude of fire, that hino kamae, that jodan position is where you should be. As for the others, hidari and migi waki kamae, you're looking at using these when you have obstructions overhead. In other words, where I can work in these tight sort of positions with the side attitudes, working from something like jodan, when I might strike sort of low-hanging eaves or whatever, becomes more problematic. So time and place, right? I could go on for a long time talking about these, but let's go ahead and cut it off here. And I think next that we're showing, the next section is the openings and closings of the Neto Seho katas. So, aside from the two-sword work being the most famous and kind of the work that people really want to do the most, it is also the work that has the most variation. This can be quite problematic in the beginning when you're learning. Where before we had an imbu version, a presentation version that we do for outsiders, we've got a pause version, and then we've got a no pause version. With the two-sword work, we have all three of those, but we also have our 5 approaches version, which is how Musashi specifically describes this work. And really, in my opinion, the 5 approaches method is the most important for the kata, because none of the work is obfuscated. It's all really out there and direct. When we show, when we film the kata, we will probably do the 5 approaches version, Musashi's version, with the application videos, since they are basically pure application, like nothing's hidden. And then with the kata video, we'll do what we've been doing the presentation versions, the pause versions, so forth and so on is important, right? With that aside, the katas, just like before, all have a sort of standard opening and closing. So Eddie is going to be shidachi, I'm going to be uchidachi. The katas start off just as with the long sword. Eddie is in Gedan, I am in Tate Zen. I am going to push into Chudan, and he's going to go into Chudan, doing the arms out to the side, and then coming into the center. Good. We're going to make some little adjustments. Drop your shoulders. There you go. Tuck your chin, tuck your tail. There you go. Ooh. All right. That's more better. This Chudan position is the one that we use most often, and rather than referring to it as Inso no Kamae every time, I'm just going to call it Chudan for simplicity, because that's what everybody in my group did. So from there, we'll step into whatever position we are in, right? Chudan, Jodan, Gedan, Hidari waki kamae or Migi waki kamae, in that order for the katas. Now, at the end, the katas are almost always in this same Chudan position, bump, 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 as we've come together and controlled that, boom. Now, from here, I begin Kamae Otoku, and he goes down to Gedan. Again, with that feeling like you're about to jump on the dude, right? Then, just as in the Tachi Seho, we do a little chicken step, right? And we retreat. Good. For all of the sword work, tachi, nito, and kodachi wazas, we do this chicken step back. In the bow kata, we do the chicken step forward. Little tiny difference, but kind of interesting, I think. So it's the basic opening and closing of the katas. Super simple. You know, it's fundamentally the same thing. Chudan to gedan to chicken step, right? It's just you're using those two sword positions. I think that is all we're going to cover in this intro video. And then next video will lead right into the Chudan kata. So, as always, if you want to understand this work, you have to pick up a sword and go train.